Hello, everybody. This is Justine Case from American Newscape, rejoining our friend Scott Dudley for American Consciousness. Hello, Scott. Welcome back to American Newscape.
Justin, I'm glad to be here, and listeners across the planet. Glad you guys are with us.
Well, I am too, and we're excited about you enlightening us because that is your new occupation, so to speak.
So I'm like the human diet. Everybody who hangs out with me is going to be a little bit lighter, and they're going to fit into their clothes. And I could be I could be the human Olympic. Let's do this.
You could be. I don't think I've ever heard you tell a lie before because my clothes are not fitting any better.
Yeah, right. Well, it's one of those gradual, progressive things, and
Okay.
results here may not indicate the results that you'll receive at home.
All right, very good. All right, Scott.
But we'll try our best.
All right, take it away, Scott.
So Justin, this should be our underlying theme. You and I take on the topics that are too big for anybody else to take on. So we took on Shining, and had a Jack Nicholson breakthrough moment. We took on Love and found out that love didn't have that much to do with it, but we learned some other stuff. We did a safety dance. Last week we did a safety dance, and there were so many different aspects of safety that just leaves your head spinning. We're going to do coping this week, and coping is, again, it's one of those things where every time you throw it out there, it's like a mirror, and people look in the mirror and they find their own little pathways on this. So hopefully we get some good generalities. That's and maybe some good specific stuff that people can try if they haven't tried it yet. And between the two of those things, we come up with a good show. Now, once again, it's one of those big pile of spaghetti shows. So if you start with your noodle on your side and I start with my noodle on my side and we somehow meet in the middle, I still want to be tramp.
I'm not going to be lady, so let's come up with another another visual. But
next week, new analogy. We'll do that.
Okay, very good. Hey, Scott, coping skills are something we all have to develop.
It's interesting because coping is a self-imposed necessity. I'll start there. So most of the time when we're coping because something inside of us decided that the situation was unbearable, unmanageable. I can't stand this. It's more than I can handle. And once we've passed judgment on something like that, then we put ourselves in the unique position of having to do something about it to feel better.
Well, I would say it's a little broader than that. It could simply be, this has to be dealt with. I've got to adapt to deal with this right now. I need to cope.
Right, but that has to adapt decision comes from you deciding that it has to be done.
Right.
And that has to be is a really interesting kind of step in terms of who we are as people. If you want to take notes on things that we could do, one of the fun things to do is to disregard I have to do something about this. And obviously, if the light just turned red and you're traveling 35 miles an hour down the street, you don't want to start on the red light. You don't want to disregard the red light. So you want to think about, well, if I disregard this, could it kill me? And probably step back from that. But if it's something more casual than that, and it's something you've always well, the house has to be clean. We've got people coming over. Does it really? Would they even notice or care?
Right.
And challenge yourself to kind of step back from the things that you've decided have to be done. And say, does it really have to be done? And if it's not life-threatening, just let it go once. And if everybody comes over and they turn their noses up and they leave with bad excuses after 10 minutes. And then, your best friend texts you up later and said, dude, your house was a total mess. Well, okay, maybe you were right. Maybe your house does have to be picked up. But maybe nobody else notices that.
Well, I agree, and that might be a skill to have. There's oftentimes a group of people come over, and I would like them all to leave in 10 minutes, and maybe that would be a coping skill.
If you want to borrow some of my cats, I find that cats are a really good slow down people from just dropping in.
Beware of cat. Beware of Luna.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
I think,
let's start with that tip. And write that one down. Is it so imperative that I have to do something to cope with it? That I have to take responsible determinations to do something about it? So, am I so angry that I have to take some deep breaths and calm down? Is that in my best interests in that moment? And then you begin to take charge of when you want to cope.
well, that's great advice, Scott. It's if we want to develop real coping skills, we need to work on our assessment skills to assess the reality of what we think is the sky is falling, the sky is falling, Chicken Little.
We had an interesting talk today in the dog park because I was using a physical example. I went to my grandkid had his birthday party like about 4 months ago. And I went to the party and it was a road trip. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to eat whatever I want. I'm just going to take advantage of the moment. I'm going to do whatever. And I used that excuse for 3 months and I gained about 12 pounds. And which is not atypical for me. I mean, that's kind of how my physiology works. And so, but at some point I said, you know what, I need to shut this down. I need to start eating right. I need to start treating myself better. But the thing at the dog park that got interesting today was, well, are you doing that? Are you coping for better health? Or are you coping because people aren't going to think you're cute if you're carrying those 12 pounds around? Is it like a vanity alert? And if it's a vanity alert, is that something you really want to have to be like to be the boss of you?
Well, Scott, you will always be cute, so it's not vanity.
Yeah, but I don't want to be cute like chubby, pinch me, adorable. I want to be
Like the Pillsbury Doughboy.
I want to be like elder model material or something. I know.
Well, somebody has to do it. So you came up with a plan and you dealt with it, but it wasn't an emergency. It wasn't something that you had to deal with, but you did deal with it. You did cope with it.
Oh, absolutely. And really, if you look at it, it's a very disciplined decision because I want to say I love sugar. I love donuts. I love the fast food. I love French fries. I love hamburgers. I had to cut all that stuff out, right? Not only that, but then I had to start eating in these intermittent fasting windows and really kind of giving up the late night snacking and stuff like that. So it was a big cope. It wasn't just a little cope because over lifetime I figured out that if I don't do the big cope, I don't lose the weight.
Well, in essence, it was a behavioral modification that you'd done before and you just implemented it again. So kudos to you. I mean, willpower is an important aspect of coping properly.
Well, and it's funny, a lot of coping translates into behavioral change. Sometimes we're just like, well, I'm going to begin to forgive people who cut me off in traffic because I'm tired of having to take deep breaths, the behavior, to calm down. So I'm going to start making a point of kind of proactive. Every time I get behind a car, just reminding myself, somebody's going to be in a hurry today. It's hot. Somebody's going to want to get home. They're going to run that really stale yellow light. They're going to do something, and it may impact me. And I'm just going to let it go because I don't have time for it today. I don't have the desire to have to deal with all the chemicals of righteous anger. It may be righteous, right? It may be perfectly legitimate anger. But why do I have to take that on?
Well, just because it's righteous in your mind doesn't mean that it is righteous.
No, absolutely. But inevitably, when we get mad about something, there's a degree of self-imposed righteousness that is driving it.
Well, I think it's, and I do believe, Scott, it's tempered with wisdom. It's tempered with age. You know, if you find yourself as old as Scott and I, and these things are still setting you off, I have empathy for you. You've missed a big portion of life wasted on anxiety and anger.
Bad chemical stuff. Bottom line is neurologically, system wise, body wise, the chemicals associated with anger or anxiety are neurotoxic and ultimately not really good for your whole system. There was a teacher. She's a doctor, and she was commenting the other day that as part of her doctor training, she took this class on stress, and she was like really dying to go see it because it was like, well, I'm going to learn how to meditate, I'm going to learn how to do yoga, I'm going to deep breathing techniques. And so she went to the class and she said, you know what, it was a real eye opener because we spent the entire class talking about how people who are poor or people who are marginalized or people who are subject to being treated in racist environments are basically eaten up by stress, and their bodies begin to fall apart over time because they're constantly in these stresses that they can't get out of just because of who they are and the position they were put in.
Well, I agree that, but I would have scolded her for making too broad of a generalization because I know a lot of those people that are extremely happy and content in life and family, and they've coped in that manner.
Yeah, it's interesting to. I mean, you and I having this conversation is already like stepping into like territory, because you and I have grown up fairly privileged and safe in a
Hmm.
world where some people are less safe, and so it's really probably hard for us to understand how stressful it is to step up in line at a fast food place, and because you're the wrong color, uh, nobody even waits on you. And that's happened to my wife. My wife is an indigenous Mexican person, and we've traveled like to the Midwest and stuff. And I saw her get like totally shined. It's like she'd step up somewhere and people would ignore her. And you and I, we don't get that. So it's harder for us maybe to see how you know I might need to cope with that every day if I was subject to it.
Right, but there are people in those groups that have adapted coping skills. And yeah,
Absolutely.
your wife certainly doesn't deserve that anywhere. And and one thing about you and I, no matter what people out there say about us, we're pretty gifted in assessment of people, in assessment of situations, and I think that helps us as well.
I would say growing up, I grew up with never being around my group of people. So I grew up. My grandparents were all like really hard Republicans, and so we struggled sometimes. I grew up in an African American neighborhood. My entire childhood growing up, I was the only white person there. Then my parents got divorced, and my dad moved to West Hollywood. And so as a teenager, I would go out and spend summers in West Hollywood, and I learned a lot about the LGBTQ culture, even though I wasn't really a part of it. And even here, moving to the Valley, it's like I was instantly adopted warmly and heartily by the Mexican culture. And I ain't got much Mexican. Like if you look at my hips do not cumbia.
Well, when we moved here, I was warned of the Mason-Dixon line and the racial stripes along it. But being ignorant like I was, I refused to recognize it. And some of the best business friends and friends I made when I came here, even though I was warned not to, were of that Hispanic culture. Remarkable people.
Yeah, I'm just hanging out going, who's nice and what is there to eat? And they stepped up on both fronts. And
Well, see, and that's the Republican in you. How does this affect me?
Well, I've been trained now to be fully transactional in everything, so
I think that comes with maturity as well. But
I'm catching up.
you assimilated rapidly, and so did I. And those were skills when I grew up as a child. And this is back when the race riots, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. I was taught not to recognize race at all and to not see race. So that was the household I grew up in. And I didn't see it. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew I resented it as a child.
It's interesting because I think I had to see race, but two different ways. First of all, I was a minority of one. I mean, we went to a Michigan State basketball game. My neighbor was an African American high school basketball referee, and he would take me and my best friend, who was black, uh, to all sorts of things. But we went to an MSU basketball game, and they had a race riot, and so I was there with two African American people, and all of a sudden there's a race riot, and I think it really put pressure on my caregiver at that point, Al, to kind of sort out how do I get how do I get this white person through this kind of increasingly angry crowd, because I need to get him home safe to his mom. And so I think I always had to kind of recognize, in some respects, race. But then I think it was really beneficial to me because I was able to see what it's like to be a minority. And I think many of my people of my ethnicity and my gender never really been put in that position, and it'll humble you. You're like, oh, this is what they're going through every day. Okay, I get it now. And you would learn to cope.
Well,
They talk about empathy, the ability to kind of look at somebody and put yourself in their shoes emotionally. There was a German woman who had a theory that I really grabbed onto, that empathy is a survival skill. And so the people who are empaths, the people who are really good at reading other people's emotions, needed that to survive, because if they didn't figure out somebody's emotion, they could be put in a very dangerous situation very quickly. And I was like, you know what? That makes sense in a lot of ways. I could see that being a reason to be more empathic.
well, maybe I developed those skills to say stay safe. When I was younger and the testosterone levels were running high, it was damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. And as I
You've got like this
matured,
Incredible Hulk thing too, so
well, yeah.
I don't think that hurts.
Well, and what helped me is I have a very ugly glare. So that would diffuse a lot of situations.
Yeah, I was big enough and tough enough at certain points to be able to get that through, but lots of times I was not, and so it was humor, it was sincerity, it was sometimes deferring the point and saying, okay, yeah, I agree, you win. We're done discussing stuff because this is not going to end well.
Well, that sparks a thought. Anger, anger as an emotion actually takes sincerity out of the equation because you're enraged. And that is, for a gift to everybody is learn how not to get angry. Period.
Well, you've only got like a fraction of a second to derail the chemicals. That's why it's easier said than done. And the minute somebody cuts you off in traffic, you've got less than a complete second to take a deep, calm, relaxing breath, have some sort of soothing thought, like, oh, it's okay. I'm going to get to where I'm going to go safely anyway. And to de-escalate yourself. Otherwise, you're already pumping up. And once you get pumped up, then it takes about 5 minutes to kind of breathe it away, or melt it away, or turn on the radio and get a really good song going on, and that you like and sing, and it's not an angry song, and so it takes a little while to de-escalate once those chemicals have just taken charge, because it's a neurochemical reaction.
Well, I do believe you can. It's a learned behavior of how to cope, and it makes it easier
What's
and
fun is
easier.
you get all jacked up on caffeine, it happens so much more easily. So just be pounding coffee, and then be cut off in traffic, and it's like, whoa.
Well, I'm not going to subscribe to that because I do pound coffee, and I don't get amped up from coffee, and it's just the way my body chemistry is. But it is easier to cope. I remember being younger. We both live in the desert, and if you're going to have a blowout in the desert, it's going to be when it's 116 degrees.
Oh, inevitably, right?
Yeah, always, always. And people that don't live here don't understand. You can't get out on the blacktop and change a tire. If you pull the spare from your trunk, it's 180 degrees in your hands. So it's a miserable point in time, but after it happens for the fifth time, you develop a coping skill. You come up with a plan. If I have a blowout, I'm going to call, get picked up, have AAA come deal with this. I'm just not going to stress it.
Or I'm gonna sit there and mutter at myself, everything's too hot to touch.
Well, no, you know it's too hot, and you know that the blowout will come in August. But if after you live for a while, you start checking your tires, and if any of them look suspect, you change them in April.
That's coping.
Yeah, and that's learned
That's
behavior.
well, and that it's good because it brings up a style of coping that is important and that is proactive.
Yes.
What can you deal with before it becomes a problem, so that if inevitably it does become a problem, it's already kind of dealt with? And that's a really good example.
Well, should we kind of do a subconscious list of our trigger points?
You know what? Triggers are fun because everybody's got a different list, right? And when you're triggered, then you probably need a strategy for untriggering, or unless you're just going to go for it and go with it. But I work with so many people trying to quit using meth or quit drinking or something, that it's like just going with the trigger wasn't a good option, because you would end up losing your kids or going to jail or something like that. So that wasn't really good. So let's talk about some ways to de-escalate your triggers. My favorite. So this is my favorite. I really, and not a lot of people like this one. My favorite is urge surfing. So whatever that thing is that is dying for you to act, and it could be it's 5 o'clock somewhere, I need a drink. It could be getting a chance to get mad about something. It could be anything. Just sit there and watch it and hold it and feel it, and don't act. So just it's there. I feel it, but I'm taking power over myself by not slipping into it, by not reacting to it. And it's not easy to do. It takes a little practice. But urge surfing is a really effective way, because once you've had the worst urge you were ever going to have for anything, and you didn't act on it, you've got a whole new superpower. Because you can say, it's like, oh, I'm dying to get this, but I don't have to.
Right, exactly. Intelligence. But we're also guilty of setting off others' triggers, like our wives. I mean, if you want to upset your wife, all you have to say is, yes, dear.
Yeah, no, I've got a pretty substantial list of things that are gonna not end well
But we,
if I speak it.
so, shame on us. Even though if we have coping skills, we need to have respect, not to pee in the Cheerios of others and triggering them. And because life becomes so much easier.
And that's a really grown up thing to do, and not everybody's, I think, wired that way. Being able to say, yeah, this person's easily triggered, but I'm somewhat responsible because I'm like lighting up trigger flares all over the place, and so they're reacting, and but ultimately, what could I have done to de-escalate that? And that's super grown up.
Well, and I'm guilty of doing that because, if I'm out in society and there's an issue that needs to be resolved and it's affecting me adversely, I will motivate others to do the right thing, and sometimes that's triggering them. And it's shame on me, but it's a lifelong character flaw that I've had, but I do try and work on it occasionally.
Again, we're running right back into another paradox where if it shouldn't be my responsibility to walk around the world and not trigger people. It's like I should be able to be myself and not be responsible, like people gaslighting me and saying, well, if you hadn't been you in that moment, then I'd be fine right now, but because you were you, I've got, I'm angry, and it's basically your fault. And I'm like, what?
Well, you and I have never professed to be anything but acquired taste.
No, absolutely. And ultimately, I think part of us maturing is to understand that if we should be kind, we should be considerate, we should be our best selves. But even when we're our best self, there are going to be moments where we get where people react to us in ways that aren't necessarily positive or healthy, and that's just the way of the world.
Absolutely. What now you started down the path to give us some coping skills. What others do you have for us, Scott?
So again, I'm going to go back to the sooner you can interrupt something biochemically, the easier it is to get it back under control. So we know how Justin is a massive fan of Star Trek, so we won't even talk about
Oh,
you
jeez,
know
that's
mind melds.
your
So
second
let's
grade
go let's go
lie.
let's go Star Wars on the let's go Star Wars on this thing. And what we're going to talk about is using the Force.
Okay.
So one of the things that is really true in human nature, and so we'll talk about like relational stuff right now, is that we have a thing called mirror neurons. And ultimately, our brain, our neurological pattern is looking for coherence or confirmation that this is the right spot for it to be. And so when we come up against a group of people or a single person or a toddler having a temper tantrum, um, our brain is trying to figure out where we need to be. And if we don't manage that assertively, we end up yelling at the toddler because their brain got our brain to mirror it. And now we're all upset. We're all reactive, just like they are. And so that's the force. The force is realizing that your brain is going to want to go in certain directions. And the sooner that you can be aware of that and challenge it and do really specific things like just taking a deeper, just taking a slow, deep, letting it out. Oh, okay. We're cool. you know, uh, that alone can be enough to make a difference. But it's got to be fast, and ultimately, the awareness is important. Meditation gets a bad rap. It has a lot of very good health
Um,
benefits to it, but it's like it's too woke. You know what I mean? It's like you're gonna sit there for 20 minutes and do nothing but breathe. Yeah, pretty much.
well, it's
But meditation, what it does is it gives you a chance to observe how thoughts emerge. And because when you meditate, of course, you're not like in some sort of weird zone. You're just being yourself and trying to be a little bit more quiet about it. And so you're still having the same thoughts come up. I got bills to pay. Oh crap, I forgot to do this. Did I feed the dog this morning? Whatever those thoughts are, they're coming up. Meditation allows you the ability to observe it as a thought. Oh, I need to feed the dog. Another breath. Oh, okay, well, when I'm done meditating, I'll feed the dog. And that's the end of it. Instead of this urgency to act, instead of this, oh, I got to feed the dog. What am I doing? I'm a bad human being. Nobody's going to like me. All of the stuff that kind of cascades off of anxious and nervous energy. Uh, Meditation's a really good way to begin to get in front of that a little bit and notice it. We're never going to be perfectly successful at managing stuff, and that's actually a nice little forgiveness too. And it's like, well, yeah, I try my best.
Well, I was never into meditation because I didn't want to dedicate the time to it. But I utilize those same principles by the face in the mirror that I use every morning, by which requires me to answer to myself.
Yeah, very, very, very similar. I've I'm what they call an LTM, long-term meditator. I've been meditating for over 25 years now. And again, I started doing it just, and I'm not even sure why, but immediately the health benefits started loud and clear, ringing up. So it's good for dementia protection. It's good for your heart rate. It's good. The long-term meditators, they've studied the cardiovascular flexibility of your veins and stuff, because we get hardening of the arteries as we age. And they found that our bodies, of us who meditate on a regular basis, are on the average 15 to 25 years younger than a comparative body of a non-meditating person. And I'm like, when I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, I could do this. It's like, it doesn't cost any money. It's I'm a really good slacker. So give me 20 minutes and tell me you can't do anything for 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, I've got that.
Not
I
a
can
problem. Well, I
put it
learned
put it in park. Put it in park.
I learned self hypnosis at a young age, and basically those skills gave me the skills to relax on command, which means that if you want to take my blood pressure in the doctor's office, I can lower my blood pressure in about 30 seconds.
I've got that too. I've got that too. Um, I had a brain entrainment device, and what it would do was it would do a combination of you'd wear lights, LED lights over your eyes, and they would flash at certain rates, and then it would do binaural sounds. So the sound would be off a certain number of a micro percentage between your right ear and your left ear. And what your brain would do then is your brain would entrain to make it sound the same. And so ultimately, these patterns would give you all of the different brain waves. So beta, alpha, theta, delta, gamma. And I did that for, this is embarrassing, I did that for years. And I got to the point where, right now I can tell you where my brain is, what brain wave length I'm doing. And if I wanted to change that brain length, which wouldn't be good for any sort of like YouTube interview, right? It'd be like, um,
But it's out there though.
but I could shift it. I could shift it and switch it. I know how to do that now with my own brain. And yeah, it is super helpful, because if I'm all wound up and I'm worried about something, I can derail it. I can, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you've got whatever existential dread stuff going on, and that seems to be just a regular symptom of middle age, as far as I can tell. Uh, Having the ability to let that go relatively quickly can save you a night's sleep, first of all, but secondly, can save you just stewing in those negative chemicals.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I'll watch The Idiot too before I go to sleep, just because it's an escape from reality. It's an escape from anything important, and it helps me shut my brain down.
Yeah, it is my friend too, but I'm picky. I'm a Turner Classic Movies. Give me something in the 1950s, black and white, that's not too loud. preferably not a musical, and I can just listen to that dialogue and close my eyes and slide off into nowhere land.
Well, something, I went through some pretty serious medical issues, and Mayo Clinic was monitoring it. And when I went through the resolution, they told me that my brain would be impaired for about 5 years, and I didn't believe it. But I do notice that when I was coming out of it, and I had a tremendous amount of anxiety to get back into the real world, I would I found myself watching Leave It to Beaver 3 and 4 times a day because it was simple. It allowed my brain to not commiserate on the state of it. And the sad thing about losing your mental capacities, if you've ever had them, is
Right.
you recognize you've lost them.
That's a When people get dementia, that's one of the reasons they get really grouchy. Enough of them realizes that they haven't got what they used to have, that they start feeling resentment and anger about that. So that is absolutely true. If you used to have something, you don't have it anymore. You've got to come to terms with that somehow.
Yeah, you got to cope. And I prescribe watching Leave It to Beaver. It worked for me.
You know, I was this came up at the dog park today too. So when I meditate, I use mantra. I use simple Sanskrit words that mean whatever they mean. But ultimately, the reason I use them is because if my brain is uh, inhaling in Om and exhaling Ma, then it's got two words, and that's all it needs. And isn't any space for any other words, and that helps kind of defrag or derail whatever kind of thing was going on that woke me up and got me worried.
Well, and I would recommend people that want to learn to meditate need to give it some time. That's a learned skill to have it effective, to make it effective.
Well, but the funniest joke, I mean, the laughing quiet part about meditation is you're not going to end up on some island of magical powers. You're still going to be you. You're still going to be sitting there like in the most serious meditative stance with the open intent, and it's 11:11 in the morning, and so you're in the magical hour, and you'll be sitting there meditating going, I think I need to change the cat litter.
Or change
And
the channel.
because that's so we have 72. They counted our thoughts. The average human has 72,000 thoughts per day. Those are unbidden thoughts. We're not creating them, obviously, or we'd be way too busy like gluing stuff together somewhere in the back of our heads. So these thoughts are just popping up and coming out. And the first step to detaching from that is realizing that I'm not the author of my thoughts. My thoughts just pop up. And because I'm not the author, I don't have an invested ownership in them. So to start with, do I care? Well, not as much as if they were my thoughts. So now they're just thoughts. And now I'm like, well, okay, very interesting. The thoughts are interesting. I keep the day kind of flowing along, but I don't have to necessarily react to them. I can treat them like leaves in the fall falling on a stream, and they're streams just carrying them away, and I don't have to like jump into the water and gather them up. I can just allow them to go, knowing that I'm going to have 72,000. So ultimately, even if I don't do anything about the thought I just had, I'll have another one in a second anyway. And if I really feel the urge to do stuff, I'm sure it'll be important, and I'll be able to do stuff to that one. And having that relationship to your thoughts is probably a really good step just in terms of coping. Just to say, oh, my thoughts are thoughts, but they're not my thoughts. I didn't originate them, and I don't necessarily have to deal with them.
Well,
Guess what? You can do the same thing with feelings. Like we tend to be really invested in our feelings. Remember we talked about the righteousness of anger, and I was thinking, well, if I get mad, there's usually some self-righteous bottom to that somewhere. Um, Most emotions are that way. It's happiness, joy, sadness. They all stem from this kind of sense of personal entitlement. Like the feeling is mine. I own this feeling. And if you stop and say, well, no, feelings are attracted to thought forms, and so if I think this is the most wonderful moment ever, of course I'm going to feel joy. But it's just a natural process of something going on. It's not something I own or have to defend or have to or even have to deal with. I could just observe it and say, oh, it's kind of a joyful moment. Cool.
Well, and if it is, celebrate it.
Well, yeah, and then not to get too hungry for it because that's that. Then you're back on the suffering train the minute you say, "Well, I want every moment to be joyful. I want it all to be happy," and it ain't that way.
Well, yeah, you're imposing your wants and desires upon the real world, and the real world may not deliver onto you what your wants and desires are.
Wait, I can't manifest my intent in the universe. Is that
No,
what you're saying?
I am suggesting that. And,
You know what? I even know why that's true. Because when you do that, you're picking a very narrow slice of your conscious mind, the car dealership part of your mind, if you will. Where it's like, oh, I want a leather interior, I want good gas mileage, I want the right price. And the problem is that our minds are so much more complex than that. So 90% of our mind's unconscious. Do you think it's always on the same page? No, it's not. So if you could get yourself all on the same page, you probably could do some pretty cool stuff manifesting. But because you can't, and because you think you can't, it's a double whammy. You end up putting energy into like, I'm going to intent my way into a beautiful universe when your subconscious is going, no, man, this is all crap. I don't even know what you're thinking about right now.
well, if you want to manifest yourself into a beautiful universe, you better come up with a new definition of what beautiful is. And there you,
That's always been one of my go-to statements is if you are not happy, lower your standards. The bar is too high. The bar is too high. And
well,
because it's just that easy.
oh,
If
absolutely.
I wanted to be rich, I would be really unhappy right now. But if I wanted to like pet the cat, I could be really happy, and I wouldn't have to even interrupt the show. So
Well,
and that's the difference of having that ability to use your mind to begin to control the aspects of how your environment ends up playing out in your life.
well, I would contend, Rich, or I would contend, Scott, that you were certainly bright enough and talented enough to become rich if you would have wanted to pay that price with your soul and the souls of those around you.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There's my avoidance, my relationship to money is well sorted out.
Yeah.
I was and part of it was growing up poor. I saw people who grew up poor who either got really hooked on money, like this mad drug that they always had to chase, or they got really bitter and resentful. And I saw both of those examples, and it was like, you know what? I want enough money to pay the bills and not have to worry about my checkbook balance, and I don't want enough money to have to worry about making more. And if I can be in that one spot, then to me, I that's the spot where I do best with money.
Well, and you enrich your soul by going to the dog park and making all those people a part of your life. You're empowering them that their opinions matter in that moment. And that's a wonderful gift you're giving them. And then you come back and share it with us.
You know what? I have fun out there because I don't think people they've always been doing this without me, with me, everything. But I don't know that they recognized the sense of community that was happening and how each person and it's such a diverse group of people. It really is. But each person brings elements of community that nobody else brings, and so that's a really good coping mechanism too. Is that and I think it's been really challenging to get that in social media. You just social media gets really siloed, it gets really stupid, and we get trapped in it because it's such a reinforcement cycle. It feeds all of our internal fears and our beliefs, and we begin to think that that's community. And no, community is a bunch of random people, and then having to make it work for all of us, where there's a general degree of respect, a general degree of interest, a general degree of caring, and that's kind of a really nice cope right there, because that's kind of the sense of we're social beings. Humans are social beings, just like dogs, just like cats. We have our own kind of way of organizing hierarchies and stuff like that. But when we take that away from ourselves, like for example, when the pandemic happened, you saw a lot of people just melting down because they needed, that degree of human contact to feel okay about themselves.
Well, and there was another component to that. They didn't know what to believe or who to believe. We all struggled with that, and we all coped by finding a place that we were comfortable with. But yeah, I don't even like to think about the pandemic because of what it did to the kids that were in school or not in school, and we're gonna have to deal with that long term.
My running pandemic joke has been, you know, it cost some kid the ages between 8 and 12. It cost me between 54 and 58. Which one would you rather lose?
Oh yeah, exactly. And there again, you and I were blessed because we had coping skills going into it, and we didn't follow the Pied Piper, so to speak, but we developed our own coping skills to deal with that time, and I'm sure we both had a lot of outreach to others, trying to help them cope as much as we could.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was interesting for me because in spite of the fact that I'm doing podcasts, I'm an introvert, and I live in a family of introverts. So my wife's an introvert. My youngest child is an introvert. She's probably introvert squared would be more fair
Okay.
for my
So
youngest child.
the second power.
Introvert times an introvert equals an introvert squared.
Yeah, second power.
And so we all love lockdown.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody's coming over. Good. No
Yeah.
intrusions. No social expectations. Great. We got this. And so, but not everybody was that way. So I was doing a lot of work in those times, trying to get people whose sense of I'm an okay human was fed by I'm an okay human because I go out in these social groups and interact socially, and all of a sudden that just got yanked off the table.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but there are a lot of people that are dependent on that in their own identity.
Very much so. Very much so.
It's probably why I never really was invited to the cool kids table, nor did I want to be there.
I was the guy at the house party sitting in the corner petting the cat or the dog. It didn't matter.
Well, but you were there, Scott, so you were just a run of the mill introvert.
Well, I was there because somebody else wanted me to go, and so I was doing the part. And I coped, and I didn't hate myself for not being more social, and I didn't feel like, well, nobody's going to like me because I don't have anything, I don't have a shtick loud enough to put into this group of people where I get to like hold the crowd for a while and entertain people. It's like that was just so disinteresting to me. Like I just would not spend energy doing that. But at the end of the day, I also had to think, does it challenge my validity as a human being? Because we put a lot of value on somebody's sociability, somebody's ability to be out, be social, be friendly, be popular, and if you lack those things, then you may have to do some coping in terms of just getting around yourself and saying, you know what, I'm glad everybody else thinks that that's cool, but I don't necessarily think that it's cool, and I'm okay with who I am.
Well, yeah, and I've always, I was always adverse to team sports. Loved sport, but I didn't want to depend on others to be successful at it. If I go back to my clubbing days, when I went to the club, which I was very good at, I went alone because I wasn't going to be responsible for those around me having a good time or and I think people would have seen me and say that, he's very social, he's an extrovert, but in reality, I was not an extrovert. I was an introvert enjoying the situation.
Yeah, doing the lone wolf thing. I like. It's funny. I like being parts of teams because I like to do the analysis and figure out what that team needs, and then do that. And then obviously, if I can't do it, then I got a problem. But and then I'll tell who's ever in charge of the team. It's like, this is what you need, but I can't do it. Um, but otherwise, I would be the glue guy.
Well,
If your basketball team needs a rebounder, I'm going to rebound. If they need somebody to pass the ball, I'm going to pass the ball.
you nourished the team, and that is a wonderful skill to have. I was in that team setting wondering why others were just in the room breathing the oxygen.
Yeah, yeah, very much can be a concern.
Well, it was to me, and I would tell them, you need to not be on this team. Let this team get something done. And it's just different. It's just interesting. We came from semi-similar times and upbringings, but we're very unique in our own ways and the way we cope with things. And your coping skills work for you, and my coping skills work for me.
Oh yeah, and there's some overlap, and not tons. Yeah, I'm thinking about for teams. I'm thinking about when I was, liberal arts degrees. We know what they're worth. They're not worth, whatever college loan money we have to pay on them. But I was in a communications class, and we did this group activity, and basically it was the underlying theme was competition versus cooperation. But they didn't tell us that. And so ultimately, if our natural inclination was to compete, a couple people got some stuff, but in general, the group did not do very well. And if the group figured out that they cooperated, everybody got rich. Then that group just circled the field, just lapped everybody. And I can still remember the moment in that class, the moment in that group where I was like, hey guys, I think if we do it this way and everybody takes a little bit of a loss, at the end of the day, we're going to gain a lot more. Because I was a little bit of a math nerd. And so I was looking at it through like math eyes. And they looked, they did the puppy dog thing. They tilted their heads at me and said, what the hell are you talking about? Woke leftist stuff, And I'm like, no, seriously, try this. And we did, and we all got A's.
Right. And then
But the lesson was well learned, was that if we can sometimes put aside what we want and look at what the group could better itself through, even if you're surrounded by a bunch of goofballs, sometimes you can get better outcomes.
well, you can, and it is what you put into it. So, and I remember those team skills, and I remember being in fourth grade, and this was your science partner, and you just had you had to learn to look at something together, and those were good learning opportunities, I think.
Yeah, good for me to step in and say, okay, well, you guys don't want to do anything, and I want to get an A, so just let me do everything.
Well, now you're sounding like me.
Well,
Trust me.
in fourth grade, there weren't a lot of easier paths.
They weren't, but that's when they tried to teach us teams and
But how
athletics.
stressed out would you get waiting for Clyde to do Clyde's assignment that you needed before you could do your assignment, and the stuff's all due tomorrow, and Clyde could care less.
Well, I wouldn't have waited on Clyde. I would have just done what Clyde needed to do, and I would have made sure that my ass was covered.
Yeah. That's what we learn about teams.
Exactly. Why are you breathing the oxygen at this table?
But the funny thing is that's a code, right?
Yeah, it
Stepping
is.
in and taking responsibility and charge for things because your value system is saying, if this doesn't get turned in or if it doesn't get done right, then I was on a team that was a miserable failure, and I'm not that guy. I'm a guy who gets stuff done. I'm a guy who knows how to do it well. I'm a competent individual. And so I'm just going to knock Clyde into the corner and grab his stuff and do it uh, because that's what my belief system is guiding me to do.
Well, it's just like,
Whereas as opposed to just taking a deep breath and say, you know what, Clyde's going to screw all this up, and I'm going to get an F, and so what? Doesn't matter. I'm still a good person.
we know at the I've been involved with a lot of nonprofits at a pretty high level, and what always amazed me is that there were members of those boards that would lament volunteers not producing what they felt, what that other board member felt they should. And I learned a long time ago, if you look at volunteers and if you get anything out of a volunteer that's positive, count your blessings, but don't have any
It's a gift.
expectation.
It's a gift from the heavens.
Absolutely, but don't have any expectations that because Billy Bob said he would get something done, that he would.
Yeah, no, because they are volunteers, and ultimately, to me with volunteers, the thing was, what can I offer them? Because to me, they should be getting something for their volunteership, whether it's a good resume, whether it's considerations down the line, whatever it is, because they're giving you a gift.
Well,
Like you said, it's like anything that you get from them is just miraculous.
but in that nonprofit realm of volunteers, we do it for ourselves. I mean, we do that to feed our souls. We do that either we're paying it forward or we're paying it backward. We're doing it for ourselves. And that's why we demand excellence from ourselves because it's important.
Yes. Yeah, I would say that one of the again paradoxical sides that I would take to volunteers is, okay, you're doing it for yourself, but there are many people and many things benefiting from your labor and your efforts. So part of being true to yourself is being fairly compensated for your efforts. And so as you begin to step into this to pay it forward, which is great, no problem there, begin to think about what might be fair in terms of how much love, how much expertise, how much hard work you're putting into whatever is getting done. And so I was always kind of building in. I grew up a Teamster. What can I say?
You and Jimmy Hoffa?
I was working at UPS when I was 17. I drank the Kool-Aid.
Well, there's no shame in that, but you weren't a volunteer.
No, I wasn't. I was making four times minimum wage because I had a good union, and it was paying for my books while I was going to school. So yeah, fair is fair.
No, absolutely, and you should appreciate all unions and respect, them when you can because of what they did for you.
I was a roadie for Leif Garrett. I don't know if you remember the kind of pop star moment that he had back in the 70s. I was his roadie, and we rolled into Chicago for a show, and I had to work with the Chicago unions, and it was so cool because it was so precise. Everything that they did was limited by contract, or they had to do it because of the contract, and everybody all the rest of the light crew and the sound crew were all kind of walking on eggshells. And to me, it was like, no, I finally am living in a world where there are absolutes, and these absolutes are really useful to me because I can, I've either got it or I don't, and now I can work with that.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting, Scott. Well,
I was coping with the infamous Chicago unions.
well, absolutely, and they were certainly embedded in that community. So, why don't hey, before we digress much more, why don't you give us two coping skills that we might want to consider moving forward?
All right, so let's do physiological ones, because that's the body. The first one is the calm, deep, relaxing breath. Whenever you think you're about to bounce into anything that you're not, that you don't really necessarily want to or prefer, and that's its own little problem. But if something is getting wound up, the easiest way to unwind it is to take a deep, calm, relaxing breath. And that is just stopping, breathing in through your nose. You could count it out if you want to. You don't really need to. Your lungs have a capacity. Once it's full, you can't do anymore. But you want to fill them up. So you just breathe in through your nose, let it get full, hold it for a second, and then just let it ease out. And you may do that and find you need another one, in which case you want to do that one too. So that's a good one. Let's go to progressive muscle tension. One of the things you can do if you've been through a roller coaster ride day, and we all have roller coaster ride days where it's just one thing after another, and all day you're reacting to it. All day you're like punching. You're like in there. You're working. You're doing your best. And when all of a sudden you get a moment, you realize that your body is just thrashed because all this emotional energy, all this kind of trying to control things, all of that energy ends up impacting your body. And so then what you could do is you could actually start a progressive muscle relaxation sequence that goes pretty fast. And you would start at your extremities. So if you tighten your feet and your hands, you can go twice as fast. But you tighten them as hard as you can, and you just hold them as hard as you can, and you hold them for like a 3 or a 4 or 5 count, and then you let them go. And then take a deep breath. And then you move up a little bit. So you tighten your calf muscles as tight as you can get. Do your forearms at the same time. Like I said, you could do this twice as fast by doing it in 2 spots. And just hold them as tight as you can, hold them as tight as you can, and then let it go. Release. And you do that sequentially up your body. So you do your thighs, you do your shoulders, you do your neck, you do your chest, you do your abdominals. If you can still make your abdominals get tight, I don't know. I'm a few Pilates classes short of a 6-pack. So, but you do that each of those, and then you let them go and take a couple of deep breaths, and pretty soon all of the stress of the day is gone. And your body is back to kind of some sort of baseline. And then you can go pet the cat or walk the dog or do any of those things. Petting cats is actually a really good anti-stressor. Dogs are pretty good too, but cats have a magical ability, especially if they're purring,
Yeah.
to absorb. You just vampire off your energy, and all of a sudden you're breathing better, you're feeling better. And the cat like doesn't even notice it. So it's not like the cat takes on the stress and they're all stressed out. It just absorbs into them and goes into one of their interdimensional portals or whatever they're looking at when I can't tell what they're doing.
Well, those are both great tips, and it's a reset of the mind, both of them. And people, once you do it and you recognize that it's working for you need to celebrate that moment because the next time you need to do it, it'll be so much easier to get back in that frame of mind.
That's a great tip too, because the minute you've got it, the minute you've got something that works for you, and you can get back to it and sequence it at the right spot, so you're not like trying to dig it out and react to it and fix it after it's already gone by. Instead, you're catching it and going, oh, I got this deep breath. Wow, that worked. Every time you do it, you're building a little pathway neurologically in your head. The more you build that pathway, the stronger it gets. So it starts out like a goat path, and pretty soon it's a hiking path. But what you want to build is a super highway.
No, absolutely. And the one cheat that's always worked for a lot of people, as long as it's not a chemical dependency, is the rubber band on the wrist. Just to recognize that that behavior is coming, or that you want that cigarette, or you want that egg McMuffin, snapping your wrist to reset your brain a little bit and then try and assess dealing with it. The biggest joke about hypnosis, Scott, I could if you wanted to quit smoking, and even though I know you don't smoke, but if you wanted to quit, I could hypnotize you to believe cigarettes taste like the most repugnant taste of a food you would never eat and a nasty smell. And you would think that that would work, and you will smell that and you will taste that if you try and smoke, but the brain, what you'll find over the course of a week, let's say it was cauliflower, you would start enjoying cauliflower. You would still be smoking, but you would be enjoying cauliflower. So that's how complex this brain thing is.
It really is. And ultimately, I think one of the coolest things about understanding our own minds is understanding that we don't have the CPU to figure it out.
Right.
We don't have the capacity to understand the magic of all the different ways that our minds work. So, if we could just step back in awe and try to be as kind and as considerate and as enjoyable as we can, knowing that life's pretty fast.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
and just try and take advantage of that instead of trying to be control freaks of our own selves. You'll find that I think a lot of the anxiety and stress will melt away in that kind of a thing too.
Well, I think that's a great place to leave this, Scott. And I think you came up with a great topic once again. So, everybody, this has been Justin Case and Scott bringing you American Consciousness. Thanks for joining us. Remember, additional information and links are provided in this video's Read More. Today's the day to subscribe to this channel. Please learn more about Scott when time permits.